The forbidden curiosity. The Velari were a proud and disciplined species. Their ways were ancient, their laws unbreakable. Every aspect of their lives was guided by tradition, including their most sacred rule, mating seasons. Unlike humans, who could form relationships anytime, the Velari only engaged in bonding once every 10 years. It was a cycle, a duty, and a ritual they never questioned. But Commander Zyra was different. She had always been curious about other species, especially humans. The Velari saw humans as unpredictable, emotional, and reckless creatures. They acted on impulse rather than logic. But for Zyra, this unpredictability was fascinating. And now, one human had arrived on her world. The arrival of Captain Ethan Carter. The research vessel, Ulysses, landed on the Velari homeworld under heavy surveillance. Only a few humans had ever been allowed to visit this planet, and Captain Ethan Carter was one of them. Ethan wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a spy. He was a scientist, an explorer, a man driven by curiosity. His mission was simple: study the Velari culture, understand their ways, and build peaceful relations. But he never expected that someone would be studying him as well. Commander Zyra watched him from afar. She was tall, with smooth blue-tinted skin and glowing silver eyes, a perfect example of Velari perfection. She had trained as a warrior, but diplomacy was part of her duty. She had been assigned to observe the human visitor, make sure he followed their rules, and ensure he didn't disrupt their way of life. At first, she thought of him as just another outsider, but the more she watched, the more she noticed something strange. Ethan did not behave like the Velari. He laughed too much. He spoke freely, without fear of status or rank. He made jokes, even when no one laughed. He did not follow a strict pattern of control like the Velari did. He lived in the moment. And most of all, he did not have a mating season, a question no one dared to ask. Zyra found herself thinking about him too much, more than she should. One evening, she watched Ethan as he sat alone near the research facility, staring up at the twin moons of the Velari sky. She had watched him from the shadows many times, but this time, she made a bold decision. She stepped forward. Ethan turned when he heard the soft sound of footsteps. He smiled when he saw her. "Commander Zyra," he greeted, nodding politely. Didn't expect company. She hesitated for a moment, then sat beside him. "You are different from us," she said finally. Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I heard that before." She tilted her head, studying him. Humans do not have mating seasons. He blinked, caught off guard by the sudden statement. He scratched the back of his head, unsure how to respond. Yeah, that's true." Zyra frowned. "That does not make sense. Every intelligent species follows a cycle. It is logical. It prevents chaos. It ensures the survival of the species." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. But humans don't work that way. We don't need a schedule for relationships. We choose when we want to be with someone." Zyra's eyes narrowed. "Choice. Yeah, love, attraction. It's not just biology for us. It's about emotions, connection, trust." She fell silent. No Velari had ever spoken about mating with such words. For them, it was a responsibility, a duty. But for humans, it was something else. Something dangerous. Something exciting. The forbidden curiosity grows. That night, Zyra could not sleep. Ethan's words stayed in her mind. Could it be true? Could a species really function without a structured system for bonding? Did humans really have the ability to love whenever they wanted? She had to know more. But curiosity was a dangerous thing in Velari society. If the Council discovered her interest in human ways, she would be seen as tainted. She would be questioned, punished, maybe even exiled. And yet she couldn't stop herself. She needed to understand the truth. The next day, she secretly accessed the human archives, something that was strictly forbidden. She read everything she could about human relationships. She watched their history, their stories, their art. And what she found shocked her. Humans had no pattern, no cycle, no restrictions. They formed bonds across time, space, culture. They wrote poetry about love, sang songs about heartbreak, told stories about longing and devotion. They fought wars, built civilizations, and risked everything, all in the name of love. For the first time in her life, Jaira felt something new. Not duty, not tradition. Something deeper. Something human. The beginning of the end. But the Velari Council was not blind. They noticed the change in Jaira. She was distracted, asking strange questions, spending too much time near the human researcher. Whispers spread through the city. Some believed she had been corrupted by human influence. Others saw it as a betrayal of Velari ways. And then the order came. Jaira was to cease all contact with the human. She was to forget everything she had learned. She was to obey. But deep in her heart, she knew one thing. It was too late. She had already crossed the line, and there was no going back. The first contact becomes personal. The stars had never looked so confusing. Commander Jaira stood on the observation deck of the Velari High Tower, staring out into the endless night sky. A sky that had once made perfect sense. Stars aligned, patterns followed, cycles repeating in an endless, logical dance. But now, after one conversation with a human, everything felt different. She had broken no laws. She had done nothing against her people. Yet, something inside her was changing, and she didn't know if she could stop it. And worse, she didn't want to. The experiment begins. For days, she kept her distance from Captain Ethan Carter. She watched from afar, studying him like a puzzle that refused to be solved. The way he walked, the way he laughed, the way he interacted with his surroundings. It was all so unpredictable. Humans were not bound by routine. They adapted, improvised, created. Most of all, they formed bonds on their own terms. But how? The Velari saw emotions as weakness. Mating was nothing more than a biological duty, a responsibility. Nothing more, nothing less. There were no poems about love, no songs of longing, no concept of romance. And yet, Ethan had spoken of it as if it were the very core of human existence. Jaira had to know more. So she did something unthinkable. She initiated contact. The strange human ritual. It started with a question. What is the purpose of dates? Jaira asked one evening, approaching Ethan near the research center. Ethan blinked, surprised. You mean, like romantic dates? She nodded. Yes, the archives mention this ritual. Humans seem to engage in it often. Ethan chuckled. Well, yeah. It's kind of how we get to know each other, spend time together, see if we connect. Jaira frowned. Your kind chooses partners based on spending time together. Ethan grinned. Well, yeah. We talk, we share experiences, we figure out if we like each other. If we do, things move forward. If not, we move on. Jaira narrowed her eyes. That is highly inefficient. Ethan laughed. Maybe, but it works for us. Jaira hesitated. And, have you ever been on such a date? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Yeah, plenty. Why? A strange feeling formed in Jaira's chest. Something she could not name. A new kind of curiosity. A dangerous kind. The first mistake. The next day, Jaira made another mistake. She asked Ethan to show her how humans bond. He seemed amused at first, but when he realized she was serious, his expression shifted. Jaira, are you sure that's a good idea? I must understand, she insisted. For science. Ethan laughed. For science, huh? She nodded. So he played along. He showed her how humans flirted, a concept that made no sense to her. He explained the meaning behind small gestures, a smile, a lingering glance, a playful nudge. For Ethan, it was just a joke, an experiment. But for Jaira, it was something else. It was dangerous knowledge. Knowledge she should not have. The warning. By the third day, the Velari Council had noticed. A formal summons arrived for Jaira. She was ordered to explain her actions. As she entered the council chamber, the High Elders stood before her, their glowing silver eyes watching her like hawks. "You have been seen engaging with the human beyond protocol," the eldest one spoke. "You are studying him too closely. You are breaking our ways." Jaira did not deny it. "I am only trying to understand." One of the elders leaned forward. "Understand what?" She hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, she knew the truth. She was no longer studying the human. She was drawn to him. She lowered her gaze. "His kind is different. I only wish to learn why." "This curiosity will corrupt you," the elder warned. "Do not let it consume you." Jaira bowed, silent. She did not argue. But in her heart she knew. It was already too late. The turning point. That night, Jaira did something reckless. She disobeyed the council's orders. She found Ethan once more, this time away from prying eyes. "I am not supposed to speak with you," she admitted, "but I do not care." Ethan's expression softened. "Jaira, what are you doing?" She shook her head. "I do not know." For the first time in her life, she was acting on impulse. No logic, no control, no order. She looked into his human eyes, so different from her own, so unpredictable. And she whispered, more to herself than to him, "I think I am beginning to understand the shocking truth about humans." Jaira had always believed that control was the foundation of existence. The Velari thrived on precision, rules, and order. Nothing in their world was left to chance, especially bonding. But after spending time with Ethan Carter, her world had begun to crack. For the first time in her life, she was uncertain, and she hated it. The breaking of logic. The Velari had perfected their society through discipline. Their cycles of bonding ensured survival without unnecessary distractions. Mating was functional, not emotional. So why did humans reject this logic? Jaira paced inside the research facility, frustration simmering beneath her composed exterior. She had read everything about human bonding customs. She had studied their behaviors, their history, even their primitive entertainment, stories filled with reckless acts of love and passion. And yet, nothing made sense, until she made a mistake. She asked Ethan the one question she should never have asked. The unthinkable question. Jaira found Ethan in the observation lounge, staring at the holographic projections of Earth's vast oceans. His home. A world so different from hers. She stepped closer, her voice unusually hesitant. "Why do humans not follow a cycle?" Ethan turned, confused. "A cycle? A structured mating season," she clarified. "Your species should require a system to maintain stability." Ethan smirked. "That's not how we work." Jaira frowned. "But why?" Ethan leaned back, folding his arms. "Because for us, love isn't about survival. It's about connection." Jaira narrowed her eyes. "Connection." He nodded. "We don't just bond for reproduction. We form relationships because we choose to. Love isn't a duty, Jaira. It's personal, emotional." Jaira's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "That is chaotic." Ethan laughed. "Maybe. But it also makes us human." She stared at him, feeling something unfamiliar twist inside her. A dangerous thought formed in her mind. What if chaos was not weakness? The forbidden realization. That night, Jaira could not sleep. Ethan's words burned in her mind. The idea of love being more than biology was unnatural to her people, but humans embraced it. They wrote songs, waged wars, built entire civilizations around the idea of choosing who to love. And the worst part, Jaira was starting to understand it, and she was starting to feel it. The watchers in the shadows. But she was not the only one paying attention. Deep within the halls of the Velari High Council, Whispers grew louder. Elders monitored her movements, her increasing contact with the human. They saw the signs of corruption. A warrior tainted by human emotions. A commander straying from tradition. And there was only one solution. She had to be stopped. The confrontation. The next morning, Jaira was summoned before the council. She stood tall as the elders glared down at her. You have been seen engaging in unauthorized interactions with the human. Jaira remained silent. Another elder spoke. You have broken our most sacred law, allowing emotions to cloud your judgment. Jaira clenched her fists. I have done nothing wrong. The eldest among them leaned forward. Then why do you hesitate? Jaira's breath caught. They knew. They had seen the way she looked at Ethan, the way she questioned their teachings. She had crossed a line she was not meant to cross. And now, there was no turning back. The choice. That night, she stood outside Ethan's quarters. For the first time, she was afraid. Not of punishment, not of exile, but of the truth she had uncovered within herself. When Ethan opened the door, she did not speak at first. She just looked at him, studying his face, his expression, the warmth in his eyes. He frowned. Jaira, what's wrong? She took a deep breath. I think I understand now. Ethan tilted his head. Understand what? She exhaled slowly. Why humans do not need a cycle. Ethan stepped closer, sensing the weight of her words. And Jaira's voice was barely a whisper. Because love is not a rule. It is a choice. And at that moment, she knew. She had made hers. Love or betrayal. Jaira stood alone in the towering halls of the Velari High Council, her pulse steady but her mind in chaos. She had always been certain of her place in the universe, a warrior, a commander, a protector of tradition. But now she was something else, something forbidden. The silver-eyed elders sat before her, their expressions carved from stone. They had summoned her, and she knew why. They had seen the way she looked at the human. They had sensed the shift in her thoughts. And they had decided she had gone too far. The trial of allegiance. The council has discussed your actions. The eldest one spoke, voice as cold as the void. You have defied our ways. Jaira did not flinch. I have done no such thing. Another elder leaned forward. Do not deceive yourself, Commander. You have allowed yourself to be tainted by human emotion. A murmur spread through the chamber. Some of the council members looked at her with disapproval, others with pity. But Jaira saw through them. They feared her, not because she had broken the rules, but because she had begun to question them. Ethan had changed her, and that was the greatest threat of all. Ethan's gamble. Somewhere across the research station, Ethan Carter was waiting. Jaira had told him nothing about this meeting. He was not meant to know. But humans had an annoying habit of sensing trouble. He paced back and forth in his quarters, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. They had been growing closer, yes, but Jaira was still Velari. She was still bound to her people, her laws, her duty. Would she betray him to protect herself? Would she turn her back on everything she had learned? Ethan clenched his fists, or had she already made her choice? The council's ultimatum. The eldest council member's eyes burned into Jaira's. You will answer one question, he said, voice edged with warning. And your answer will determine your fate. Jaira remained silent. The elder leaned forward. Do you renounce the human? The chamber fell into silence. The words were simple. The answer was supposed to be even simpler. All she had to say was yes. A single word, and she would be forgiven. A single word, and she could return to her life, her duty, her place among her people. A single word, and she would never see Ethan again. Her fingers twitched. Her throat tightened. And for the first time in her life, she hesitated. The council saw it, and in that moment, they knew. She had already made her choice. Ethan refuses to leave. The alarm sounded across the research center. Ethan spun around as the doors to his quarters locked. A cold voice echoed through the speakers. The human visitor will be deported immediately. This is final. His heart slammed against his chest. They were sending him away. And Jaira, she wasn't stopping them. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Had he been wrong about her? Had she chosen them over him? Had she chosen order over emotion? He refused to believe it. So he did the only thing the human could do. He fought back. The escape. Ethan moved fast, overriding the station's control panel. Security was coming. He had maybe 10 minutes before they reached him. He didn't care. There was only one person he needed to see. One person who had the power to stop this. Jaira. Jaira's defiance. The council had already decided. The human would be removed. Jaira would be forced to undergo reconditioning, a process that would erase all traces of human influence from her mind. She would forget. She would return to the way she was before. She would become obedient once more. But deep inside, something burned. Something untamed. Something human. For the first time in her life, Jaira felt anger. Not the controlled, tactical aggression of battle, but raw, defiant rage. And when the guards moved to take her away, she fought back. The ultimate betrayal. She moved like lightning, disabling her captors in seconds. Gasps filled the council chamber. Elders stumbled back in shock. Jaira had turned against her own people. And she did not care. She sprinted down the hallways, dodging alarms and lockdown barriers. She had only one goal: find Ethan. And when she finally reached him, heart pounding, lungs burning, she saw the look on his face. Relief, but also fear, because she was no longer just a Velari warrior. She was a fugitive. And now, they would both be hunted. Escape to the unknown. The night sky above the Velari capital was vast and unbroken. Cold, silent, watching. But the silence had been shattered. The alarm screamed across the corridors, warning of a fugitive on the run. Not a human, not an outsider, but one of their own. Commander Jaira had betrayed her people, and she was running. Beside her, Captain Ethan Carter struggled to keep up, his human lungs burning from the sprint. His mind raced faster than his feet. How had this happened? How had they gone from quiet conversations under the twin moons to running for their lives? He glanced at Jaira, the warrior who had once sworn loyalty to her people. Now she had turned against them for him, and it was only the beginning. The pursuit begins. Behind them, the sound of boots thundered through the corridors. The Velari enforcers, silent, precise, relentless, were closing in. Jaira didn't look back. She knew how they hunted. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. They wouldn't capture. They would erase. The council had already decided. If she couldn't be controlled, she would be neutralized. Jaira would not let that happen. Not to her. Not to Ethan. They turned a corner, the emergency lights flashing red against the metallic walls. Jaira's mind moved fast. They needed an exit. They needed a ship. Ethan's last stand. Jaira led them toward a hidden passageway, an old maintenance tunnel that led to the lower docking bay. But then, the enforcers caught up. A flash of movement, a warning too late. A stun blast ripped through the air. Jaira shoved Ethan aside, barely dodging the shot herself. They were out of time. Ethan knew it. So he did something stupidly human. He stopped running. Before Jaira could stop him, Ethan turned to face the enforcers. "I'll buy you time," he said. Jaira's blood ran cold. "No," she snapped, grabbing his arm. "We move together." Ethan grinned. "Come on, Commander. Let me be the reckless one for once." She hated that grin. She hated that she cared. And she hated that he was already charging toward the enforcers, his hands raised in surrender. The ultimate choice. The enforcers surrounded Ethan, their weapons raised. "Human," one of them hissed. "You are out of options." Ethan held up his hands. Hey, I'm just a visitor here. No need for the guns. The leader stepped forward, ignoring his words. Where is the traitor? Ethan smirked. What traitor? Jaira clenched her fists, hidden in the shadows. She had a clear shot. She could take them all down in seconds. But if she did, she would cross the final line. Not just a fugitive. Not just a rebel. An enemy of her own people. And then, she stopped thinking. She acted. Breaking point. Jaira launched herself from the shadows, striking the first enforcer with brutal precision. A heartbeat later, chaos exploded. Blaster fire lit up the corridor. Ethan dove for cover. Jaira moved like lightning, disarming and disabling enforcers before they could react. For a moment, it looked like they might win. Then, a warning shot grazed Ethan's shoulder. He cried out, staggering. Jaira saw red. She struck harder, faster, no hesitation, no mercy. When the last enforcer fell, Jaira turned to Ethan. Blood. Not much, but enough. You are injured, she said, voice tight. Ethan, still breathing hard, chuckled. You should see the other guy. Jaira didn't smile. She grabbed his wrist. We are leaving. Now. No more running. No more hesitation. They had one chance, and Jaira would burn the entire station to the ground before she let anyone take it from them. Escape to the unknown. The docking bay was chaos. Velari soldiers swarmed the hangar, searching for them. Jaira spotted their target. A sleek human research shuttle, small enough to go unnoticed, fast enough to outrun pursuit. But the doors were locked. Of course they were. Ethan gritted his teeth. Cover me, I'll hack it. Jaira positioned herself in front of him, blaster raised. Time was running out. The sound of approaching guards filled the air. The lock flashed green. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. The doors sealed. Engines roared to life. The ship blasted off. And just like that, they were gone. The point of no return. As the planet shrank behind them, silence filled the cockpit. For the first time, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan broke it. So, he exhaled, wincing as he touched his shoulder. We're fugitives now. Jaira didn't respond immediately. She was staring at the stars. For the first time, she was not bound by rules. Not by laws. Not by duty. For the first time, she was truly free. But that freedom came with a cost. She turned to Ethan. They will come for us. He met her gaze. Then let them. Jaira studied him, this strange, reckless human. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not because they were safe, not because they had won, but because for the first time in her life, she didn't know what came next. And she liked it. The final chase and the ultimate choice. The vastness of space stretched endlessly before them, cold and indifferent. Stars flickered like distant whispers, ancient and unmoving. But behind them, chaos was coming. Jaira sat in the pilot's chair, hands gripping the controls with practiced precision. Ethan sat beside her, his shoulders still bleeding from their narrow escape. The stolen shuttle had barely made it out of the Velari system. They were not safe yet, because the Velari did not tolerate traitors. They would come. They were coming. And when they did, Jaira would have to make the ultimate choice. The Velari response. Aboard the Velari warship Krallis, the High Council convened in silence. The betrayal was absolute. Commander Jaira, a warrior of honor, had not only broken tradition, she had forsaken her species for a human. This was no longer a question of discipline. It was a hunt. She would be found. She would be eradicated. No Velari had ever defied their people and lived. And the hunt had already begun. The incoming warships. Ethan's fingers tapped anxiously against the console. So, what's the plan? Jaira's gaze didn't shift from the blinking red warning signals on the screen. They are tracking us. Great, Ethan muttered. And the good news? She exhaled sharply. There is none. The Velari didn't need to fire weapons to kill them. They had something worse, a gravity net. If the pursuing ships deployed it, their shuttle would be paralyzed in space, unable to move, unable to fight. Jyra had one chance, one final chance. She turned to Ethan. If I fail, they will take me. Ethan frowned. Yeah, well, that's not happening. You do not understand, she said, voice tense. If they take me, they will erase everything. My mind, my thoughts, my choices. Ethan went still. They'll brainwash you. Jyra nodded once. They will make me one of them again. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Not if I have anything to say about it. He reached forward, flipping a switch. Hold on tight. The ship lurched forward, speeding toward the asteroid field ahead. Jyra's eyes widened. You are flying into a debris zone. Ethan grinned. You've never seen a human escape plan before, have you? Jyra muttered something in Velari. Ethan was pretty sure it was an insult. The death trap. The asteroid field was a chaotic storm of rock and ice, spinning wildly in the void. No Velari warship would risk following them inside. The unpredictable movements would tear their massive ships apart. But their shuttle was small, maneuverable. Jyra's hands flew over the controls, guiding them through the madness. The warships hesitated at the edge of the field. Their weapons locked onto the shuttle, but they couldn't get a clear shot. Ethan whooped. It's working. Then, the gravity net deployed. A pulse of energy rippled through space, reaching for their ship like an invisible hand. The controls froze. The engines died. The ship stopped moving. They were trapped. The final choice. The Velari warships began to close in, careful, precise. They didn't need to rush. They had already won. Jyra's hands shook over the controls. There was one option left. A desperate, reckless, human option. She turned to Ethan. If we overload the reactor, we can break free of the net's hold. Ethan blinked. Oh, that sounds great. What's the catch? If we do not time it perfectly, the ship will explode. Ethan exhaled. Ah, small detail. He grinned anyway. Let's do it. Jyra stared at him. You do not hesitate. Ethan shrugged. That's kind of a human thing. She shook her head. You are insane. Yeah, Ethan agreed. But so are you. She did not deny it. The countdown. Jyra initiated the reactor overload. The ship shook violently. Warning alarms screamed in every language. They had 7 seconds before the core detonated. The Velari warships rushed to disengage the net, realizing too late what was happening. Jyra counted down. 5 seconds. The gravity net weakened. 3 seconds. Ethan's hands hovered over the engine switch. 1 second. Jyra shouted. Ethan punched the controls. The reactor released a shockwave of energy, just enough to break the ship free. The engines roared back to life. The ship launched forward, barely escaping the blast radius. And just like that, they were free. The aftermath. The warships fell behind. The net was useless now. The Velari had lost. For the first time in history, a Velari warrior had escaped their control. For the first time, Jyra was truly free. She sat back, breathless. Ethan leaned against the seat, grinning like a maniac. That, he said, was the worst flight I've ever had. Jyra exhaled, shaking her head. Ethan glanced at her. What now? She looked out into the vast unknown. We keep running. Ethan nodded. Together. She turned to him. She thought about her people, her past, the life she had left behind. And she knew there was no going back. She smiled. Yes, together. The ultimate bond between alien and human. The universe stretched before them, endless, unclaimed, and free. For the first time in her life, Commander Jyra was no longer a soldier, no longer bound by duty, by laws, by the rigid expectations of her people. She had chosen exile. She had chosen rebellion. She had chosen him. Beside her, Captain Ethan Carter leaned back in his seat, the soft hum of the ship's engines filling the silence. He let out a slow breath, as if only now realizing they had actually survived. So, he exhaled, tilting his head toward her. What now? Jaira gazed at the stars ahead. For the first time, she did not know the answer. And she liked it. A fugitive's life. The stolen shuttle was silent, drifting through the cold embrace of deep space. Their escape had been miraculous, but miracles didn't last forever. Resources were low. Fuel was running out. And the Velari. They weren't done hunting. Jaira knew this wasn't the end. The High Council wouldn't accept defeat. The chase would continue. And eventually, they would have to fight. She turned to Ethan. We must find allies. He raised an eyebrow. You mean people who don't want to kill us? She nodded. He sighed. That's a short list. But he was smiling. And so was she. A dangerous proposition. Their ship's sensors pinged, a nearby rogue trading station floating along the edge of an unclaimed star system. A black market hub. No rules, no governments, no allegiances. The perfect place to disappear. But also the perfect place to get killed. Ethan leaned forward, eyeing the station. This is either a great idea or a terrible one. Jaira smirked. Likely both. Ethan grinned. I like those odds. The Station of Shadows. The docking bay reeked of fuel, smoke, and tension. The kind of place where trust got you killed, and no one asked questions. Jaira and Ethan moved cautiously, scanning the crowd. Ethan kept his voice low. So, what are we looking for? Someone willing to trade information. Ethan smirked. Ah, so we need a criminal. Jaira glanced at him. We are criminals now. Ethan laughed. Good point. The unexpected offer. A deep, gravelly voice interrupted their search. You're the fugitives, aren't you? Jaira and Ethan froze. They turned slowly to see a tall, reptilian alien leaning against a cargo crate, arms crossed. His yellow eyes gleamed with amusement. Jaira's hand instinctively moved to her weapon. Who are you? The alien grinned, revealing razor-sharp teeth. The one who's going to help you. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Yeah. And why's that? The alien leaned closer. Because I hate the Velari more than you do. An unlikely alliance. The reptilian introduced himself as Jorik, a former smuggler who had been hunted by the Velari for years. He had no love for their empire, no reason to betray them. And more importantly, he had a ship. A real one. A fast one. A warship stolen from the Velari themselves. I'll make you a deal, Jorik said, eyes glinting. You help me take down a Velari outpost. I help you disappear. Jaira didn't hesitate. Deal. Ethan blinked. Wow, not even gonna think about it. She turned to him. Would you? Ethan grinned. Nope. And just like that, their next fight began. The final chase becomes the first war. The mission was simple. Strike a blow against the Velari before they struck first. Jorik's warship was powerful, but needed a crew. So they built one. A rogue guy. A runaway mercenary. A hacker with no name. And, of course, a Velari trader and her human partner. They were no longer just fugitives. They were a rebellion. And they were ready to fight. The beginning of something more. As the warship jumped to light speed, Ethan stood beside Jaira at the bridge, watching the stars streak past. This is insane, he muttered. Jaira nodded. Yes. And you're still with me on this. She turned to him, eyes unwavering. I chose this. Ethan smiled. Guess that makes two of us. She didn't hesitate. For the first time in her life, she reached out and took his hand. The chase was over. The war had begun. And together, they would change the galaxy.